Indiana Jones. It's a podcast about Indiana Jones. Every movie, 1 minute at a time. Indiana Jones Minute.
Welcome back to the Indiana Jones Minute. This is the podcast where we are drawn to the incredible magnetism of Oriana's armor. And we have the perfect guide to explain it all to us today. I'm Pete Mummert.
I don't feel good. I'm Tom Taylor.
I'm Gerald Christopher. Down, down, down. Go, go, go. Mine, mine, mine.
And you think you don't feel good, Tom. Just think how this poor screaming Oriana corpse is feeling.
I feel like he looks.
Well, that's not good. Hopefully you feel better. But
Thank you.
Today I'm extremely excited to be joined by Dr. Tobias Capwell. Toby is the curator of arms and armor at the very prestigious Wallace Collection in London and is one of the world's leading authorities on medieval and Renaissance weapons and armor. And he's a great guy, and I'm really excited to talk to him again. Welcome back to the show, Toby.
Thank you so much, guys. How you doing?
Good.
Great.
Good.
Yeah,
Excellent.
Good joining us.
Yeah, we're going to have lots of armor questions, I feel, this minute.
Yeah, there's a lot of armor in this, although they don't show you very much of it. But I found some photos from the Indiana Jones exhibition. There was a museum exhibition that had various props, and they had the whole armor in that show. So,
oh wow,
we can talk about the parts of the armor that you don't actually get to see in the shot as well, if you like.
That's perfect.
Cool.
I find a certain irony to that. There's a there's a museum exhibition on Indiana Jones findings and artifacts.
Had to make a museum so all of his stuff could finally get in a museum.
Yes.
They had to force it.
Yeah.
It was a touring exhibition a couple of years ago, and different museums were supposed to customize the show with archaeology from their own collections and try somehow to make it valuable as a tool for teaching people about archaeology.
Oh wow! I hope I hope Toby, you stole whatever artifacts there were and you went straight to Marrakesh.
Well, you got to do what you got to do.
Yep. And what we got to do today is talk about minute 54. And minute 54 begins with Indy going into a transcendental trance as soon as he sees a pile of gold. And it ends with him staring into the eyes of the titular crystal skull.
Well, I have a question here. We've touched on this a little bit, but Toby, perhaps you can enlighten us here. Did Oriana want to be buried in that gold mask, or did someone else cover his death-rattled face? Were they just like, Oriana, stop it. I can't think with you looking like that, screaming, mouth agape here.
Well, I mean, as a Renaissance Christian, I doubt that he would have wanted that on his face in death. It doesn't really go with the armor either. It's sort of like he's looking like a Renaissance knight right up until the moment that mask goes on. And that was, I mean, I'm not sure he would have been too happy with that.
Yeah.
It's very gauche. Clashes with the rest of the ensemble.
You wonder, maybe just someone got tired of looking at him.
Yeah. Or maybe that's how he died. Somebody said, "Oh, you like your gold? Here you go." And just shoved a gold mask on his face.
Yeah,
now who's a Gilded Man? That's how he got the nickname the Gilded Man, since he never actually had it in life.
Yeah.
It's kind of ironic because they were supposed to be looking for this gilded El Dorado person this whole time. El Dorado, right, is the mythical king of the city of gold. It's not it's not any conquistador. So he found it in the end, apparently.
Yeah, it's a total Twilight Zone kind of thing. Like he finds the pile of gold at the end, and then he screams and dies.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because we were wondering, like, was he screaming? Was he yawning because he read about the plot of this movie? Or what was that expression on his face? But in the script in this minute, it actually is called out. It says, Mutt is eye to eye with the screaming dead face. So to perhaps answer an earlier question, I guess he died of unnatural causes. But that raises the question, who killed him and why?
I forget if that gets answered in the next minute or so, or a
I
couple
forget
minutes.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
there are answers thrown out there. I'm not going to say they all make sense, but I forget if that specific thing, like how he died, is one of them.
Toby, have you watched this movie?
Yeah,
If so, why?
Yeah, well, I
Can you enlighten us?
did
Help
see it
us?
in the theater.
We're
I saw it in the theater, and then I have watched it several times in preparation for this discussion.
I'm
No.
sorry. We're struggling with why Oriana is here and why they've chosen either to be mummified or mummification was forced upon them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see. My problem is that I go back to the history books and I read what really happened to him, and then I go back to the movie and I'm trying to figure out, because they do have some tiny bits of real history in here that serves as an inspiration for whatever they think they're doing, but then it's really hard to tell how much of the actual history you're supposed to integrate into the film, and where the film departs from history, and to what extent this is supposed to be the historical Francisco Oriana or what. I mean, that's part of the problem with the film, right? Is that it departs very dramatically from reality, whereas the first film kind of sticks pretty rigorously, as far as it can, to the historical context. So
Yeah.
I don't know how much of the real story of Oriana is really applicable here. You know, he died of depression and illness down in the Amazon. He wasn't really anywhere near Nazca,
Right.
And he'd been fighting these women warriors, which are, sort of people thought were Amazons, which is why the Amazon River is named the Amazon, because he died fighting women who were good with bows and were killing his men.
Right.
So you got to answer how he got all the way over to Nazca, and why he's wearing an armor he never would have had, and it's a tough one.
Now you see, Shishak, that's someone you can hang your hat on.
Exactly. That's exactly the point right there, Jerry. Is essentially I've always liked these films in the order that they came out, and it seems like as you go along with the films, they move further and further away from the gritty realism that really defines the first one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think so too.
And so with like the Ark's a real thing, and it inhabits a real historical context, and the Judeans are real, and Shishak is real, and the film then simply reveals that the supposed supernatural power of the object is real too, and then the implications of that are left to the audience to ponder. And then in the second one, the Sankara stones aren't totally real, but they're based on real things. The Shiva lingas, or the lingams. You probably talked about that way back when. So those are real objects that, again, exist, that don't necessarily have this kind of supernatural power, but they're believed to. And then the film just literizes that. But you've moved one step beyond the first one. And then the Grail, you move further away again, because the Grail isn't real, and it never was. And it's a legend that appears in the 12th century, over 1,000 years after the crucifixion. And it was originally a plate, not a cup. And it had mystical significance, but the cup of Christ part comes much later in the legend. So the Grail is still a bit real, in the sense that it's a real legend, a real cultural artifact, but it's not an actual physical object. And then, we've ended up in Crystal Skull, which is obviously it's all garbage, and there's nothing real behind it. And especially the indie of Raiders would have known that this is all garbage. So you've moved quite a long way away from reality now. And I think that's the problem, and that in this film, the detachment from anything real kind of manifests on all kinds of levels, whether it's the overuse of CGI or just the plotting of the story, which doesn't adhere to reality terribly well.
Yeah.
Oh, that was beautifully said. That was great.
It's like increasingly throughout the movies, they take something that's real or kind of real and just go, but what if?
Exactly.
Yeah. And like with Raiders, it seems like whatever they what ifed about it didn't really contradict what we already know about the real stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it just got more what if he from then.
Yeah. Well, maybe
Yeah,
it's all
and-
these concussions that Indy keeps getting. Maybe at some point he just
But it's not like even a plausible fantasy. That's the thing about about Raiders, and then progressively less. The fantasy element is very contained, and so it's you have to accept it as plausible, and that gives you a tingly feeling because it's very it's very tantalizing. And in Raiders, that goes to the filmmaking as well. Think of those shots of Belloc's excavation at Tanis. It's like a David Lean epic, and everything you see is real. Everything's in camera. And then, in contrast, at the other end of the spectrum, everything in Crystal Skull looks weirdly small. It's shot on sets, not very big sets, on green screens with CGI environments, and there's plenty of shots that are impossible video game angles. Like you'll get to that later, but you know what I mean. Whereas in Raiders, going back to the first film, they can only show you where they can put the camera for real, and there's a verisimilitude that comes out of that. So it feels like Raiders of the Lost Ark is a history movie, and it stands next to Lawrence of Arabia and that kind of production, whereas Crystal Skull is a History Channel movie.
Nice.
Wow. Well,
so that's my abstract to form the basis for the discussion about the armor and why they haven't done that right either.
Well, that's a perfect lead in. But before we get to the armor, that's also a perfect lead in. You were talking about attachment, and Indy sees all of these artifacts. Like he sees the gold, and he sees all these artifacts, and his face just absolutely lights up. And he goes into he looks like he goes into a trance. But unlike a lot of people, when Indy meditates, he's not contemplating the transience of all things or release from samsara. He's thinking, "This is all my gold." He's just like his face is lit up in gold. It's amazing. And then like his eyes are not focused on anything. And then all of a sudden it's like he comes out of a trance. He kind of shakes his head and he looks at Mutt.
I love that he can't fathom how someone could have entered a tomb and left it undisturbed.
What kind of monster?
He actually
just comes in and looks at stuff and leaves.
What he says is, quote, "It's odd. Somebody has been here and gone. They've left all this gold." And, so I was thinking, do you think our mystery tomb visitor might be Saint Nick? Like
he left all this stuff in the first place.
Yeah, like because he says he left all this gold, and I mean, I thought, well, that's open to interpretation. Maybe it means he didn't touch the gold that was already here, or maybe like a Saint Nicholas type thing. He entered the tomb. Maybe Oriana left his, he left his clogs or his shoes out, and Saint Nick came in and left all this gold. It's like December 6th. Maybe he visited him on, the feast day of Saint Nicholas.
Makes about as much sense as anything.
It does make more sense in the movie, I think.
It is funny, the look that he gives, like Pete, you said he sort of shakes his head and like looks up in Mud. It's like, it looks like he's like, oh, he got mad at me when I was going to take the knife before. Is he going to let me pocket this stuff? Do I need to like be sneaky about this? I just want some stuff.
Well, there is in that pile of stuff. I'm curious your thoughts on this. I don't know if you saw this, Toby. There's like a big pile of there's gold and there like some vases and there's a European style crown.
Oh, I wasn't paying attention to that.
And I have no idea what a crown would be doing in here.
That's when he goes down and looks at the gold.
It's in a couple, maybe it's a minute before. And it's just kind of in the side, like off to the side, but it's really weird. Like I have no idea.
Yeah, why would there be any of this stuff there? Because I mean, they have to take the South American gold back to Spain to melt it down and make it into new things. And
yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, no, I don't see the crown. He must be earlier along there.
I feel like a crown is part of like your Party City collection of loot. Like if you need to fill a scene with loot, you got coins and you got a crown. You maybe have like a chest of gold or something, and a goblet.
Right.
It's just part of what comes with the loot.
Well, these coins are kind of Well, these doubloons are kind of Party City doubloons because they only become magnetic when Indy holds them out. Like they only become attracted to Oriana once Indy says, or once Indy seems to say that they're about to become magnetic. And I'm wondering,
Yeah.
are the coins self-aware, or is Indy, does he have some kind of natural characteristic that draws out supernatural power in all these movies?
I think they're just victims of the same intermittent magnetism that we saw at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
nothing else is being attracted to Oriana here. It's just the gold coins.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and Mutt has a switchblade.
Mhm.
I mean, for starters.
Yeah.
They got all sorts of stuff, belt buckles, and I mean...
And Indy holds the gold coins for a while before they go zoop. Like, it's
Yeah.
not like he doesn't just pick them up. Like, it seems like they would just, like, that whole room would be attached to Oriana. Like, it'd just be a big blob.
Especially since they set that up at the beginning, you know, so like the magnetism, like you throw some, what was it, shotgun shells or, you know, gunpowder, whatever it is. And it goes like, you know, 200 yards, 300 yards.
Yeah.
And now you got these, all this metallic stuff that's like 6, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet away.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. But maybe there's something special about this armor, Toby.
Yeah. Well, where to begin with it?
Special.
I suppose if we have to look at the history to figure out what this is supposed to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oriana first went to the New World in 1527, we think, and then he was there for quite some time, like 15 years. And he went back to Spain in 1542 and then went back to the New World again in 1545 and died in 1546 after he was being attacked by natives, and he got lost in the Amazon Delta and couldn't find his way in, and that was the end of him. So any armor that he took on the 1545-46 expedition for himself, being, you know, the commander and somewhat high status, you would have thought it would be new gear that he was taking. We'd think maybe it would have been made between about 1540 and 1545, although, you know, his troops might have been wearing gear that was, you know, somewhat older than that. So let's say that we're looking for a high status armor of about 1540-45, and that's not what this is. It's not even a little like that. First, it's polyurethane. It's not. It's not metal. So that's a problem. And even if you don't, you know enough about armor to know it's polyurethane, the way they handle it and the way it behaves, I think, works on your brain subliminally, and you know subliminally that this isn't right. It doesn't look like metal, and it doesn't behave like metal. And when Indy grabs it, he sort of casually picks it up and hands it to Mutt.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, it's physically shown not to weigh what it should weigh. I mean, a real complete armor of this period should weigh between 25 and 30 kilograms. You know, wow. It should be, you know, 50 to 65 pounds. And even, let's say he picks it up by the breastplate, and then because he's a skeletal wreck, the legs fall off, okay? But even if the legs fall off when he picks it up, he's still got something like 15 to 20 kilos in his hand.
I thought you were calling India skeletal wreck for a second.
You know, and including whatever remains of the person inside. So, and then he just kind of casually shoves that to Mutt with one hand. So it's behaving like polyurethane. The actors are integrating, you know, or interacting with it as though it's polyurethane. And the Foley work is a bit lazy here too, because we should hear some metallic clinking and clacking, which we don't get when Mutt is sort of struggling with it. So overall, if we take this as a complete ensemble, the head to foot armor, it basically looks nothing like anything that ever existed. If you dissect it a bit further, in the essential form, the breastplate and the leg armor, which you can see in the long shot early in the minute, but you can see better on the photographs of the prop in the exhibition. It looks in style vaguely German, dating from about 1475, if they look like anything at all. But the pauldrons, the shoulder plates, have a very, very late 16th century look about them, if not early 17th century.
Wow.
And so it's a stylistic hodgepodge. And the arm defenses are just a mess. It feels like the person it feels like the person who made those looked at a picture of something made in the late 16th century before he turned off the lights, smoked some drugs, and got to work.
One of the questions I had about conquistadors is that they wear, as you said, 65, 70 pounds of armor.
Well,
and here they are traipsing about Central and South America, which is unbelievably hot and humid. And, they're on horses, which are hairy. I'm just wondering, how on earth did these guys just navigate day to day without just sweating everything out or dying from dehydration? Or, how did they function?
Yeah, I think the first thing is they probably never, ever, ever wore full plate armor in the New World. And by the time Europeans had made the first initial expeditions to the New World in the late 15th century, everybody would have known that this is not an environment where you take full plate armor. So they probably wouldn't have even packed it, let alone worn it. They would have had helmets. They would have open-faced helmets. They would have probably had breast and back plates or other body armor. But the occasional illustration, Aztec and Inca illustrations of Europeans, fighting them and things, you can see they've got some armor, but it's stripped down to the minimum. Sure. Because that's what's practical. And these people, contrary to a lot of misconception about knights doing a lot of impractical things like not being able to get onto their horses and not being able to get up if they fall over, all that stuff isn't true. These people are practical fighting men, and they do what's practical. And as soon as your equipment is encumbering you and it's costing you more than it's worth, you get rid of it. You get rid of it. That's why, soldiers fighting in the Middle East, they routinely chuck their ceramic plates out of their body armor because it's great protection, but it's way too heavy for what they're doing.
Wow.
Well, I had read somewhere that a lot of Cortez's men started wearing the quilted armor that the Aztecs wore.
Yeah, it's the right kit for the job.
You're right.
But so how would it be possible to wear a suit of armor like this and walk from the mouth of the Amazon in Brazil all the way through the jungle and up and over the Andes and end up in Nazca?
It wouldn't be a good idea. It doesn't encumber you as much as a lot of people might think, but it does slow you down. There is a physical cost in wearing it, and that cost has got to be worth paying. And even campaigning in Europe, knights didn't travel hundreds of miles in their armor. They carried their armor in their baggage train, and they put it on when they think they need to. But there's no point in even lugging it and carrying it anywhere if you're never ever going to need it. And like people operating in in foreign environments in any period in history, the British in India or whoever, you very rapidly absorb the practices of the local people because they've had a lot longer to work out what works and what doesn't.
Just Pete, that just makes me think of the Badwater Ultra Marathon. The what is the 118-mile run from Death Valley up to Mount Jacinto, whatever, and July 26th or whenever they do it.
Oh my God.
There are people who have run the London Marathon in armor.
Wow.
But as like a charity thing. I was thinking of doing it because I thought in full plate armor, running the London Marathon and raising money for the League for the Protection of Horses would be somehow poetic,
Wow. After you run it, you need charity.
Yeah. You could do it, but you'd need to train for it, and you'd need better shoes.
Well, yeah.
Please give generously. I just did this to myself.
So if you want to keep going with the deconstructing of the armor, there's probably more to say about the decoration.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And that's an interesting question in reference to the real New World and what the Spanish were up to in this period. I one of my core research interests is armor of precisely this period made for the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who was also King Charles I of Spain in this period. He was the king ruling Spain when Oriana was on his expeditions. And for years, I've been fascinated by Charles V as a patron of the Renaissance armorer's art. And they have, of course, a phenomenal amount of gold and usually fire-gilded decoration on these armors. And I was sitting in the Real Armeria in Madrid looking at these things. And I have an interest in the New World, too, and the Spanish in the Conquistador period. And I started to wonder whether they were gilding these armors with Aztec and Inca gold, because they were shipping huge amounts of it back to Spain, and basically the Spanish Empire was financed by their presence in the New World, and I just wonder if all of that melted down Aztec and Inca treasure could have ended up as fire gilded decoration on the king's armor. I'm not sure if there's any way you could scientifically prove it, whether there's some molecular signature that'll tell you that the gold came from South America rather than from somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
But it would be cool if you could prove that.
What does fire gilded mean?
Oh yeah, well, fire gilding is one of the most important decorative techniques for armor, and it's a way of chemically bonding gold to steel or iron or ferrous metal, in general. So basically, it's tricky to explain the technique because when you explain it quickly, you make it sound easy and simple, and it's not easy and it's not simple, and it's actually horribly dangerous. But basically, in a nutshell, if you take very fine gold dust, very fine pieces of gold, and you mix it with mercury, the gold dissolves in the mercury, forming an amalgam, the gold mercury amalgam. And then you need to, because gold can't chemically bond directly to ferrous metal, so you need to cover the steel with a coating of copper by washing it in copper sulfates or something. You need to copper plate it, basically. And then you spread your gold amalgam onto that surface, and it has the consistency. It has a kind of buttery consistency, and then you apply heat, and you heat the stuff up, and you get it hotter and hotter and hotter. And then there's a moment when the mercury fumes; it burns off quite suddenly. There's like a flash of black smoke. It's like magic. It's like a magic trick, actually. And then what you're left with is the gold chemically bonded to the steel via the copper coating. And for armor, and this fire gilding is used for hundreds of years for all kinds of things, but for armor decoration, it's particularly good because it's a thick layer of gold bonded to the steel, so it can take a beating. You can fight in gilded armor, and the decoration can take the punishment. It won't just pop off like gold leaf or crappy modern electroplating or whatever.
Well, that was my question. So there's not you don't have dress armor and then usage armor. It's all.
Well, there is such a thing as parade armor. Okay. But it's actually much, much rarer than you'd think. It's very easy for modern people to go into a museum like the Metropolitan or the Wallace Collection and see anything pretty and assume if it's pretty, if it's got gold on it, it must be ceremonial. They wouldn't possibly fight in something so expensive. It's a sort of an understandable assumption to make, but it's completely wrong.
Wow.
They fought in the majority of even the richest, most expensive stuff you can imagine. I've got a helmet in the Wallace collection, which was made for Charles V's younger brother, Ferdinand. and it is fully gilded. The entire surface of the helmet
Wow.
is covered in quite a thick coating of fire gilding, and then it's covered in sword cuts. He had this thing
Really?
made, and he went out in a tournament and he fought in it, and it got beat to hell. And it's not good enough to be able to afford this stuff. You have to go out and throw it away casually in an afternoon of nightly fun.
Well, what happens? Let's say Tom and I are going to have an afternoon of nightly fun.
Uh-huh.
And,
Sure.
and I have like a really fancy, like gilded armor set that I'm wearing, and Tom defeats me somehow in battle.
Uh-huh.
And say I'm dead, and
Somehow.
Tom takes my somehow. And Tom takes my armor from the battlefield, like that's his trophy. Like, what would he do with it if he can't? It won't fit him. Like, does he melt it down, or does he just hang it up on the wall, or what happens to it then?
Have it let out.
He'd probably sell it. Just sell it. I mean, it depends. I mean, there are cases of people who kept their defeated opponent's armor as trophies. The reason I'm in New York at the moment actually is I've come to visit the exhibition of Maximilian I at the Metropolitan Museum, the last night, art, armor, and the ambition of Maximilian I. And Maximilian was Charles V's grandfather. And actually, the whole reason the Spanish were able to take over the New World and take over Europe, the Habsburgs in the 16th century, is because of the political and military diplomatic groundwork that Maximilian did in the early 16th century. But Maximilian had a penchant for taking trophies of people that he defeated in tournaments and things, or allowing them to make gifts of their armor to him after he had beaten the crap out of them. And some of those trophy armors are in the exhibition at the Met right now, actually.
Oh, wow. Wow.
But if you couldn't afford to keep it, because most people can't afford to keep a fantastically gilded armor, they would sell it.
And then you just hope to find someone that's that exact size to sell it to,
or I mean, you might try and harvest the raw materials in some way. It could be possible to get the gold, to remove the gold from a fire gilded armor. Certainly, if it's got other precious materials in its construction. Those can be recycled and made into other things. You can't really melt armor down and then make new armor. Metallurgy doesn't really work like that, but you can do a lot of other things that are still really valuable.
Post it up for sale on Maximilian's list.
Right.
You gotta find a taker.
Yeah. And you want to make sure the original owner sees that you did it.
Yeah.
So they can feel even more awful.
Well, I'm curious how much, I haven't been to the Wallace collection, but say Prague Castle has a huge collection of suits of armor. And where did they get all of them? Are they all local, or is this a collection that a king put together, or several kings put together, or how do they come up with these giant collections?
The different museum collections come together in different ways. I mean, in Vienna, you have the Imperial Armor in Vienna is derived from a 16th century museum collection. One of the first museums ever assembled was put together by Archduke Ferdinand of the Tyrol in the mid-16th century. And he wrote to his nobleman friends all over Europe and said, I'm putting a hall of heroes together. It's like a didactic display of great Renaissance princes. And could you send me an armor? Send me one of your armors so you can be in my gallery, and all these people sent him his armor, and he had his own collection in his castle in Innsbruck, and then that forms the basis of the modern Vienna art museum collection. The Wallace is a single collection put together by Sir Richard Wallace, a Victorian collector who just bought stuff on the Paris art market, basically, and just had a lot of money to spend and had taste and put together a very fine collection. And other big collections like the Metropolitan Museum are amalgamations over time. So they are bequests, they're purchases, they get pieces coming over a period of 100 years, and they're still collecting. They're attracting things from all over the place.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, you actually mentioned that that this period of the New World and that sort of a clash of cultures is of interest to you. And we've been talking a little bit about, what do you think these conquistadors were like when they showed up? Sort of, did they, were they good guys, so to speak? Or
Mhm.
I mean, they're renowned for, sort of not only their gold lust, but some of them for a real bloodlust and just I think DeSoto, right? He sounded like a kind of a crappy guy.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean,
yeah.
do apparently there are also other individuals, who show up in the New World here, who are seem to have a very different take on what the Spanish or the conquistadors are doing, and they either call them out, or they complain, or they write back to the king and they say, "Hey man, what's going on over here isn't cool."
Hmm. Oh yeah, well it's a very very complex situation, and it's like any group of people. You've got people with different attitudes, different senses of right and wrong. Some of them are psychopaths. Some of them are pacifists. Some of them are humanitarians. Some of them are just ordinary people who find themselves in desperate situations and feel they have to do bad things. It's very, very complicated. I think it's wrong to say they were all just a bunch of murdering bastards who took over someone's continent. It's just a very complex situation, and you have to kind of get a sense of the time and why they were there, and what they believed. And they it's interesting. The relationship they seem to have had with the native people is very interesting. I get the sense that some of them really regarded the Incas or the Aztecs as human beings, and as fellow human beings, and the king of the Aztecs or whoever is a fellow ruler, and they want to build a relationship between the ruler of the Incas and their king in Spain, and other people view them as animals, subhuman, but that's kind of like now. I mean, it's not really that different than now. People get into these situations, and it's very complicated and difficult.
Well, I know Bartolomeo de las Casas was a guy that started as a conquistador with Cortez. Then he became a priest. And he was one of the people that championed the idea that the Aztecs and people in the New World were fully human, because they would actually have debates like, are they fully human? Are they somebody we can just enslave and subjugate?
Right. And when there's a promise of a fantastic amount of money to be had, that is always in danger of compromising people's, moral orientation.
Well, and I suppose their job is, hey, you're supposed to go over here and bring back all sorts of riches. I mean, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So if you come back empty-handed, now I am not defending that policy, but I'm saying that's, if you come back empty-handed, you're going to have to answer to somebody. The king or whatever has put up all sorts of his personal capital to go and to finance your exhibition, and so I guess they feel like I can't I can't come home empty-handed. It's a lot like Mac.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Mac can't go home empty-handed again.
Except unlike the conquistadors, Mac is not very memorable.
No.
So I thought what they've obviously tried to show an armor here that's highly decorated. I mean, they want to give a sense of a very rich armor, and they want to play into this whole character who has a lust for gold. I mean, that's laudable that they try and make the armor look in a way like what they expect the character would be after. But the decoration on this armor is kind of strange as well. They've got stuff that it's hard to tell what they think they're doing here, really. If you go to second 21, you get a good view of the breastplate. And you can see that it's made up of, it's a 15th century design. It's much too early for what they're doing here, but the breastplate is composed of an upper part that looks like it's meant to be heat blued or blackened. And then there's a separate piece, the lower breastplate, or what's called the placard, which is covered in what they seem to intend as two different types of contrasting decoration in gold. You've got like a solid gold border along the top, and then a kind of narrow band of dark foliate scrollwork running through the middle. And I think some of that is intended to look like fire gilding, which we already talked about. But then where you've got this solid band of gold with this dark decoration in it, this is something that just doesn't happen. You don't do plain decoration on a gold ground like that. It just doesn't happen.
Wow.
So again, it's like someone working in polyurethane, and there are various ways of simulating decoration on that. I know some of the people who worked on the Lord of the Rings films, and they came up with a lot of very clever ways of simulating decoration by designing the decoration in a computer and then digitally cutting out these stencils in vinyl and then putting them on the polyurethane and spraying it. And then when you rip the vinyl off, you've got all these designs on it. It's a clever and fast way of doing it. But there is one technique on this. If you look on the, instead of dark vines on the gold ground, on the shoulders, the arms, and the legs, you've got this much finer gold foliage on a dark background. And that's actually the best part of this whole prop armor. That actually is a really good approximation of a real Renaissance decorative technique, which in the 16th century they called counterfeit Damascening. Which is actually a form of overlay, where if you take your iron or your steel to be decorated and you cross hatch it with a very fine knife-like tool, forming like a kind of crisscross matrix on the surface of the steel of like these fine scratches. And then what you can do is take some very, very fine gold wire or a piece of gold, and work them into that scratched matrix with a probe. And then form your designs. And this is actually a fairly easy and cheap way of making it look like you've got really rich inlay when it's actually just on the surface. And this is a decorative technique that was invented in India and Iran, and it only came to Europe in the second quarter of the 16th century. And you can find it used on armor as early as the 1540s. It's pretty rare then, and only on royal armors generally. But it's the only thing on this armor that could conceivably be right for something made around the time of Francisco's second New World expedition in 1545-46.
What about the gold mask? Is there anything historically valid about that, or is that way out of left field? Or
it's pretty made up. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they did
I phrased the question that way.
Yeah, there are gold masks. We have actually in the Wiles collection we have a solid gold Ashanti mask from Africa.
Wow.
And there are South American examples of masks made out of solid gold, but they don't really look like that.
Oh well.
They still did a pretty good job on those shoulders.
Well, yeah, on the decoration, the shape of the plates, and I don't want to be too mean, but a gilded turd is still a turd.
Well, it surprises me they didn't have somebody telling them, well, it should maybe look more like this, like a movie with this size and of this budget.
That's precisely my point, though, Pete, is that is that they would have in the first one.
Yeah.
And let's not forget that even in the third one, where they're really starting to move quite far away from the essential realism values of the first film, the Grail Knight, as we said before, looks pretty darn good, and someone cracked a book and did some homework and thought about what this should look like. But now, we've moved into a realm where the production value here is really detached from reality, and it doesn't come into it.
Now you must see that all the time when you go see movies or TV shows. Does it always like stab you in the gut, or is it kind of like, Hollywood, what are you going to do?
Well, it used to stab me in the gut, and now I've gotten better at blocking the knives. And I got a thicker skin, and I don't ever expect anything decent anymore. And that's not. I don't want to do down the people who are working on these films too much. The essential problem now, why they cannot, it's basically impossible to make a good armor movie now or a good historical epic now. Impossible, and it's because of the business model for making films now. You know, if you go back to Raiders, if you go back to the 70s, and you look at any of the mind-blowingly good history films made in the 70s, part of the reason they can be so good is because they have very long pre-production periods where they're just researching, they're just designing, they're just coming up with concepts. You know, they'll do that for a year, 2 years, even 3 years before they ever start making or shooting anything. And now you're lucky, you know, if you get 3-4 months pre-production from the start of the design and concept phase to the shooting dates. And there's just no way in hell you can do a decent amount of historical research or build decent armor in that kind of time. It just can't be done.
Is there a movie that stands out, or any movies that stand out as being great armor movies that they get it right?
Yeah, Henry V by Laurence Olivier in 1944.
Oh,
Wow.
That was about the last time they got it right.
Wow. Wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, that's a good one. They did a great job with that.
Oh, cool.
And they had an essential with a historical film too. I think it's very important to have a respect for your source material. And you're taking on a history film. You're dealing with the story of real people's lives, and that deserves some respect. It isn't just some content, you know, seem to be mined at will. You know, you have to. I really think a good history film approaches the subject matter with integrity, and that's harder now too. You know, it's like sometimes the historical accuracy is viewed as an impediment to the creative vision of the people working on the film. Like they feel like the historical authenticity is something that's tying their hands rather than something that should be celebrated and reveled in. So it can be a production attitude problem as well.
that's what we keep saying. Like, why did they tie themselves to Oriana, an actual guy, when there were thousands of these conquistadors running around who they could have just made up one? And it would have, that would have been, you know, somebody would have said, oh, there's no such guy as that. But, you know, you can write anything you want about him. And then if you went to the effort of making some legit armor for him, there wouldn't be a problem.
You could, Tom, you could go further with that line of questioning. You could go further and say, why are they imposing this storyline on Indiana Jones? Because this isn't real. This isn't really an Indiana Jones storyline. And I have a hypothesis that I would like to submit for continued scientific testing. If you can find a way of doing that, because, you know, as I said, I want an explanation for this movie.
Oh, don't we all?
You know, this doesn't make any sense, right? You look at the credits of the actors, the designers, the production crew, the director of photography. These are all the best in the business, right? So how did this happen? What the heck is going on here? And when I was looking at the armor and then thinking about the implications, what does the way they've done the armor tell us about the way the film's happening and what's going on with the film? Ultimately, if you again look at the credits, ultimately this has to come down to the story and the writing. You know, I know this is a contentious point, and I know you guys have sort of struggled with this already, but we have to. I think we have to lay this on Lucas. He's clearly the one calling the story shots, and you get the sense from the interviews and the extra content on the DVD. Certainly, the interviews with Spielberg and really everyone else, that this feels like an exercise in humoring George.
Yeah.
Okay,
I've been trying
but
to defend George the whole time, but that's kind of true.
Okay, but
Yeah.
I can turn this around, and I can actually defend him with this theory, if you'll
Okay.
allow me.
Yeah.
I think George forgot that he was making an Indiana Jones movie, and I think what he came up with is actually a Star Wars movie.
Oh my God.
Whoa.
Because think about it, he's been spending years doing the prequels, right?
Uh-huh.
And he's been in absolute total Star Wars mode for years and years and years. And then he comes straight onto this. And if you think about it, everything that doesn't work in this movie would be great in a Star Wars movie.
Wow.
Right? This is just my hypothesis. I've only dipped into the proofs, and I think there's many more proofs required to shore this theory up. And it's only a theory at the moment. But just try and recast and rework the whole thing in your imagination. It's Han Solo. He's captured an elite he's captured by this, Imperial Special Forces unit commanded by some dark Jedi Sith lady with mind powers and a lightsaber. It works there. That immediately works fine.
Yeah.
And then they're on the trail of some magical alien artifacts that Han and Chewie smuggled somewhere back in the day or something. And Han escapes and joins up with a kid who turns out to be his Force-sensitive son, Ben Solo, whatever. And then you've got more action and escapes, and they're recaptured by the Imperials, who also turns out they've captured Luke and Leia. And in Star Wars, you can have everything that you can't have in an Indiana Jones film, like the Tarzan swinging, right?
Mhm.
We've seen Jedis in training doing that in The Empire Strikes Back, right?
Well,
Or
Doesn't
you could-
Chewie do that in Attack of the Clones?
Yes,
And
Exactly.
Luke-
It's
Yeah.
well established.
Luke
Well
does it in
established.
Jedi.
yeah, and Luke
Yeah.
does it in Star Wars.
Right. And then there's all kinds of things that shouldn't be in the Indiana Jones movie, but they're perfect for Star Wars. You can have the giant jungle mowing machines that never existed. You can have the tracking devices with blinky red lights that never existed. You can have the intelligent man-eating insects, the mind powers, the impossible acrobatic sword fights, the quantum singularities or gateways in space-time, and the aliens. You can have all of that, and it's fine.
Wow.
Oh, I totally want to see that movie.
Yeah,
now.
Me too.
I'm standing up, Toby. I'm standing up.
I thought you were just the armor guy.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Well, people expect art historians to have explanations for things, so I'm kind of overactively searching for explanations. And Pete, I think also this theory proves that this is all Han Solo's fever dream, of course, because he's been having this fever dream for a long time. So if this movie is happening in his fever dream, it's got to be very, very close to the point at which he wakes up. And when you're waking up from a dream, the real world starts bleeding in, and you're not sure what's the dream and what's real.
Yeah.
The Han Solo bleeding back into the dream world of Indiana Jones, and reality disintegrates before our very eyes.
Maybe Marion showing up is just Leia asking Han to turn off the alarm.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Stop hitting snooze.
Well, that kind of brings me to one of the main questions I have for all of you guys. Does this minute 54, does this minute mean that this movie is officially about aliens? Because I think I was holding out. I think I was holding out the whole time. There are whiffs of it, and that's sort. And then we see here in 54, we see the crystal skull, and you're like, okay, well, there's been all this talk about elongated heads and skulls, and you look at that, and you're like, okay, that is not the Nazca people. That is
Right.
an alien.
And the fact that Indy himself is wigged out
Yeah.
in a way that we've never seen before. Like he's been
See, I
in
thought he
awe
was-
of stuff before. He's been fascinated by stuff, but he's just like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah.
I thought he was
Yeah.
breaking the fourth wall or whatever, and when he says unbelievable, like I think he's talking about this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, did they bleep something between unbelievable?
It's
It seems like they might. Yeah.
That's hilarious. I listened several times because I had it down as either or. It's unbelievable, or it could have been believable. Actually, and this is for you here, Tommy. When Indy is regarding the crystal skull, does that remind you of Chewbacca putting C-3PO back together?
Oh, that does kind of.
that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's like holding his head.
That's probably
and-
what Chewie was saying at the
Yeah,
same
he's
moment.
kinda looking-
Unbelievable. I'm stuck with this job. I got to put this guy back together.
And if you look at the crystal skull, is that pink spot in the middle a ruby?
That's the brain.
Yeah, it's like the brain. But so is the brain a ruby? Or like an amethyst?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
Like
I bet we will, though.
somebody purposely put a pink spot in the center of the skull. You know?
That is
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder how deliberate that is. If it's
Yeah, I was wondering that too.
is it his hand on the other side of it, and we're seeing through the thing?
Yeah, that's sort of what it looks
maybe.
like.
You think it might be his hand?
Yeah,
maybe
you can
you're
see
right.
right
I'm not
through
sure.
it. It's sort of flesh colored.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Huh.
Maybe it is
Oh
his
yeah,
hand.
you're right.
Yeah, because then he moves his hand, and that's when you see it, when he puts his
Okay.
hand on
Wait a minute, I'm looking
no,
at
no,
it.
wait,
It's
no,
further
it
back.
isn't.
Oh.
It's further back.
No, no, his
yeah.
other hand
Yeah,
is
his
on the
hand is-
jaw.
Yeah.
He's under the- yeah. Oh,
Ew,
weird.
that's gross.
Uh,
Well, I'll tell you what's not gross is when you first see the skull and you see there's a shot of Mutt through some spider webs,
Yeah.
and the music there and that shot feels like it's a straight off of Fantasy Island or something. It's very 70s, early 80s.
Wow.
It
That's
is.
funny.
It is.
Gosh, it's just striking me that if you look at the crystal skull head on, he looks a lot like the silver Death Star droid that you see on
Yeah.
the sand
He
crawl.
does. Yeah, he does.
yeah.
Yeah.
My
Big
favorite
eyes.
character in all of Star Wars.
You know what's really weird is that music, Pete, like the
Uh-huh.
opening interval, or there's something about it that's reminiscent of Leia's theme.
Hmm.
It doesn't go there ultimately, but it starts, and you're like,
Yeah.
wow, this sounds like it's from Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, it could. It could.
That
Or
happens a lot
Fantasy
with
Island.
Mr. Williams.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, speaking of sisters,
Yeah. Speaking of sisters and gross brains and all sorts of fun. Yes, let's see. This just in from Professor Christy Porter coming over the wire. When was the last time you hazed someone by handing them a conquistador?
I think Toby's the only one that could actually answer that.
Yeah. You ever haze somebody by just handing them a conquistador in full armor?
I feel like I've been missing out now. I did have a modern artist who wanted to bring an actual human skull into the museum and mount it in one of the armors and
wow.
take photographs or something. But I've never been handed an. You know, that's an interesting point, actually, that if you did actually find a perfectly preserved Renaissance armor like this with the original owner still in it, it would be fantastically valuable.
Yeah.
Would be.
Yeah.
What would
I
have
mean-
been?
I mean,
Yeah.
he's thinking about taking that knife, right, in the earlier minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, the value of that pales in comparison, and yet he just treats the whole thing like so much junk.
I think at
it's
the end
like-
of his various adventures, he ever returns to some of these places. Like, well, okay, now that the interdimensional beings are tucked away, I can go back to that spot where I found the thing and collect those bodies and all that loot.
Well, that's the thing. Like the stuff he passes up is always the most valuable. Like he just crawled over the Aztec calendar stone. Like that. That
Yeah.
is probably the most iconic image in Mexico. You know, for Mexican
Right.
history.
Yeah.
Right.
And like he brings that out. He's known forever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a world map covered with little red pins of places he's got to go. Oh, yeah, I got to go pick that up.
Got to go get that.
I was in a
Gotta go
hurry
get
last time.
that.
Well, he's kind of razzing Mutt here, isn't he? Like he doesn't. You would not give, the mummified conquistador to somebody to hold.
Right. I gotta say, like, I mean,
Right. He's making him grossed out on purpose. Like, just kind of like, all right, you want to hang with me?
he's a
Yeah,
fun
he would
guy.
have done that to Willie too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah, or Shorty.
That is a very kind of Willy kind of like. I keep thinking like if I cared more about this movie and this quest, if it meant more to me, I'd be really annoyed by this little goofball moment. But since the movie's kind of
Sure.
a big goofball moment, I'm kind of like, all right, whatever.
But I like that Mutt never rises to the bait. Like Mutt doesn't react like Willie would. Like he's always just kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like he can
That's
tell he's a
true.
little disconcerted, but he's not screaming or his eyes aren't bulging out or anything.
Right.
Right. Right.
He gets short shrift, Mutt does, and I really,
Yeah.
I think he's doing the best with the role, and he's doing the best he can with the material. And I think people have been a bit hard on him for ruining the movie, and he's been made the scapegoat when he's actually one of the better parts of it in some places.
So you contributed to
Yeah.
our Mutt watch without us even asking. We've felt the
Yeah.
same way this
Yeah.
whole time.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
great. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
We weren't sure what was going to happen, but you're right. He's sort of remembered for being, the rotted, fetid part of this movie, and I don't think it's true.
No.
Well, how
not
ironic
at
is
all.
it that he's actually one of the strong parts of the movie,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
which is
Enjoyable,
crazy.
even.
That's a little far.
I'm sorry.
He's like a big stamp
Thank
guy.
you.
Wait a minute. Doesn't make any sense, Peter.
Well, anyway, thank you. This has been absolutely fantastic, Toby. Really appreciated having you
Oh,
on today.
absolutely. Yeah. This is
Thank you.
wonderful.
This was great, and we are definitely gonna keep following that Star Wars theory,
Yeah.
Excellent.
Oh my God.
Excellent.
I think
Yeah.
and I
Really
still want
well
to see
said.
that movie. But
Yeah,
next
exactly.
time.
Exactly. It would have been good. It would have been good.
Yeah, maybe better than Solo. actually.
Maybe. Yeah. Better than a lot of things, I think.
But in the meantime, would you like to send people anywhere? Is there anything you'd like to share with people? Like any?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, first of all, of course, there's the Wallace Collection. It's one of the UK's National Museums of Fine and Decorative Art. It's in central London, and it also has one of the world's greatest collections of medieval and Renaissance arms and armor, and lots of other cool artifacts and things that I'm sure people would be interested in.
And I would like to tell everybody that Toby's Instagram account is amazing to follow. Like the stuff he posts is wonderful.
I'm still a bit new to it. I'm still kind of feeling my way a bit and trying to figure out what works on there, but I try.
No, that jousting stuff when you were in Poland was amazing.
Yeah, that was pretty fun.
stuff. Yeah, but everybody else, if you want to come back to a world-class collection of buffoons, Tom, Jerry, and I will be here.
Buffoons and
Monday.
doubloons.
Yeah, buffoons and doubloons. We'll be here Monday for minute 55 of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull here on the Indiana Jones Minute.
Tommy,
Mm-hmm.
hold this.
All right, thanks. Oh, gross. Why? Jerry. I fall for that every single time.